Hi everyone, Scott Weaver with Factory Direct Designers Workroom. And today we are going to be working on a scallop valance with bell, scallop and bell valance. And this is a pattern that I just had made up, and we were going to give you the calculations and how to cut it, how to shape out the bells, how to cut the scallops and the returns and all that good stuff. So stick with us, I'll be right back. Hello everyone, Scott Weaver with Factory Direct Designers Workroom. Today we're going to be making a scallop valance with bells. And so we're going to start right off. It's going to be mounted on this board right here. This board measures 39 inches wide, and we are going to put 3 scallops on this board and 4 bells. So you're going to have a bell, a scallop, a bell, a scallop, a bell, scallop, and then your last one's going to be a bell. Now with that, since we are adding bells and the bells are going to be on the ends, whatever size width of a board that you're going to be using, and in this case it's going to be a 39-inch wide board, we are on our valance, on our scallops I should say, we are going to deduct 2 inches on each side of this. Now stick with me on this. Normally, if you're making this is 39 inches, you would think that your scallop would be 13 inches, 13, 26, 39. But in this case, since we have a bells going on each end of this, say this is your bell, since the bell is going here, you need to deduct 2 inches on each side of this board for your bell. Having said that, that means that 39 inches, and we'll just use the calculator here real quick, you have 39 inches, and you're going to minus it 4 inches, 2 inches on each side. You're going to get 35 inches. Now we're going to divide that by the amount of scallops we're using, and in this case it's going to be 3. So you're going to divide that by 3. And you come up with 11.666 inches. We're going to round this down to 11.5 inches. You could go up to 11 3/4. I'd rather have the valance come out a little narrower if it's going to, than to be a little bit bigger, because we can always pull the bell out to make it a little wider if necessary. Although it's true that we could bring the bell in a little bit also. However, this is how I prefer doing it. So, with 11.5 inches, we're going to begin making our scallop. Now, with an 11.5 inch wide scallop, we also, since we're attaching bells to it, we have to add a 1/2 inch sewing allowance on the left-hand side and a 1/2 inch sewing on the right. So we're actually going to be cutting the scallop 1 inch wider for the sewing allowances. Having said that, we're going to put this down. And we are going to cut it 12.5 inches. So the width of this is 12.5. Now we're going to talk about the drop. In this case, this valance is going to be 16 inches deep. So you need a 1/2 inch for your sewing allowance on the top, And then you're either going to use a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch sewing allowance on the bottom, and that's going to be your preference on which you want to go with. In this case, I'm going to add a 1/2 inch for the bottom. So I have a 1/2 inch on the bottom and a 1/2 inch for the top. Now I've also cut this a 1/2 inch longer for my shaping because I don't like to come and just bottom out on the bottom. So I'm going to be putting the mark at 17 inches. That is going to be with my sewing allowance, of course. Now we have a short point. This is where the where the bell is going to meet, and I'm going to use 2 inches less, or 15 inches. So this is 17. I'm going to come here to 15 inches, and I'm going to put a mark here. Now, this mark right here, I want it 1/2 inches long. And the reason I want it a 1/2 inch long because I want the sewing allowance included on here, which we already did. So I'm going to put a 1/2 inch straightness. So that is the 1/2 inch straightness that we're going to attach to the bell. If we were to just round this whole thing out, and that would mean that you wouldn't have your sewing allowance, or you would, but it won't come out straight. So adding this and having a 1/2 inch straightness is for your sewing allowance. Now we're going to curve this. See this right here. We are going to make our scallop. And of course it's folded in half. You can eyeball it however you want, and then we're going to trim it off. Making sure that you keep your 1/2 inch here. And let's take a look at what we have. That's what that looks like. Now if you don't like it, you can shape it out a little bit more, but that's pretty close right there for my purposes. Now we're going to make the bell. The bell has to be 15 inches. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take another piece. In the width, we're going to be talking about the width. I am going to cut for my bell 14 inches wide. And we have to make it 15 inches long. So we have a piece that's 14 inches wide by 15. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim this down to 15. Now what you're going to notice on this, here's your scallop. You'll notice that this matches up right here. And since you're giving it a 1/2 inch sewing allowance, by the time you sew this from here to here, that straightness that you allow will be gone. Now, since this is a square piece, if you were just to attach it squared, it would look like this. And of course, you don't want that. You want it to look like the bell. So how do we do that? We're going to take this piece, and this is the width is 14 inches, and then we are going to fold it in half, and now it's 7 inches. like so. On the top of this, we're going to make this 9 inches. Folded in half, that's 4.5. And I'm going to place a mark at 4.5. Then I'm going to draw a line from here down to the corner, like so. Just like that. So here you've got your 4.5 inches here, and this was 14, so that's 7 inches here. And then we are going to cut it. While I have it folded in half, I'm going to put a little notch right here. That tells me that that's the center of my bell. Although it'll probably be trimmed off in a second. But anyhow, so now this is what you're going to have. You're going to have something that looks like this. Let me show you how it looks. This is approximately what it looks like right now. And this is how it's getting the flare in here. Now, with that, when you were to put this up against here, you'll notice that it comes over a little bit. Don't worry about that. It's fine for now. But we're going to add another little shaping to this right at the bottom, because we're going to want to add just a little shaping to the bottom of this. Let me show you what it looks like right now. It goes straight across, and that's okay if that's what you want. Okay, so that's what it looks like right now, but it's kind of boring. So now I'm going to fold this back in half. And I'm going to get a little closer so you can see this. I am going to give this just a little shaping. I'm going to start over on the end that has the angle. And I'm not going to come too close because we have a sewing allowance here. Let me back that up so you can see it. So I don't want to go into this sewing allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come across. Got that so far? Probably just going to round this off a little bit more. Makes it probably about an inch and a quarter. I know if you want an exact measurement, this is kind of like, cooking. You give it a pinch of salt. Well, here's kind of one of those type of things. It could be an inch, could be an inch and a half, could be an inch and a quarter. And then what we're going to do is going to trim this off, and I'll show you what this is going to look like. And as I do it, I'm going to tweak it a little bit. You notice I just took a little bit of this away here. Just a little easier for me when I'm cutting it. Now, what happens? This is what that looks like. How does that change things? Let me show you. Now, see what we have here? Then we put this in underneath there. Now you can see that this opens this up right in here. My point is, at this point, you want to make sure that you have something interesting as for a lining on this. That means you either want to use the same fabric and line it in the same fabric, or a nice contrast to pick this up a little bit. So if you use like a gold or something as you're lining it, it would probably make this stand out a little bit. But anyhow, that's what you have so far. Now we're going to get to what is called the return, because now we have to make a return. The return, this is our board. This is what we're putting it on. The return is what comes around here. It returns around the board and goes back to the wall. That is also going to be a little scallop. Now, what's going to happen is if you were to attach this right here, which is where it will be, the return has to go around the board here, but also has to go back to this point right here, right back to here. So it's not just adding this, it's adding the rest of it. So how much does that take? Well, let's look at this for a second. We've got here, we have this is going to be a 4-inch box right here. Half of that box is 2 inches. This is 3.5. So we need 3.5 and 2 is 5.5. And then we need 1 inch for sewing. So we need a 6.5 inch piece. 2 inches because it's going to tuck into here. 3.5 inches because it has to go around the board, plus 1 inch. 1/2 inch sewing allowance on both sides of it. 2, 3.5, 2 inches, 3.5 is 5.5 inches, and 1 inch is 6.5 inches. So now we're going to cut a 6.5 inch piece, and it has to be, let's see, did I get the right piece? No. It has to be the same length as our scallop. The scallop is 17 inches. We're going to do 6.5 inches this way. Draw our line. Like so. Okay, now we have a 6.5 inch piece. Since this piece is going to be attached to the bell, this is what we have to go by. So here what we're going to do is we're going to put our bell right up to it in length. Again, we want a 1/2 inch of straightness before we start the shaping. And then since we made this 17 inches, we're going to put a line at 17 inches. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put a 1/2 scallop on here. Like so. And we're going to cut it. Okay, now let's see what we have. We have our bell, our scallop, it's sewn together, and yes, we understand this is going to be a little off, and that's fine. When we sew it all together, we're going to trim it off at the top after. And then we have our return, just like that, and it goes right to the bottom of that. So there are the 3 pieces we need. And when we're done with it, we're going to have this like that, and a return that comes in here like that. Now what we're going to do, we're going to cut a total of 3 of these for our scallops. We're going to cut 4 of these, our bells, and 2 returns. That's just for the face of the fabric, if you're using a print, whatever it is. But you're also, this is just for our pattern, but after you get these cut, you would actually cut your lining, whatever you're using for lining, using these as a pattern. So you're using these for your face of your fabric and your lining. Because as you can see, when you're putting this together, this is almost going to create a circle because of this, because this has an angle to it. Okay, so we'll be right back with these cuts. Okay, now I've got this all cut out, and a couple key points here. You want to make sure that when you're cutting these out, that you make a left and a right return, that you don't cut them both rights. So in other words, if you have a fabric, like this fabric almost looks the same on both sides, but it is different. So you want to make sure that you're making a left and right on the returns. Also, another point is that when you're cutting these scallops out and your bells, that if you have a motif or a stripe, you may want to take the time to center like a flower, if you had a flower, some type of motif on these. But if you're just using a solid like I am, it doesn't matter. Now the next step, and another thing, you're always going to have one more bell than you are scallop. Keep that in mind. If you have 3 scallops, you're going to have 4 bells. If you have 5 scallops, you're going to have 6 bells. Sometimes that can get a little confusing, but you are beginning with a bell and you're ending with the bell, so that means you're always going to have one more. And so just keep that in mind when you are cutting these and figuring out how many scallops and bells you're going to have. So the next part of this is you're going to start with your return. Everything's going to be pinned to the bottom. And you have that 1/2 inch of straightness. That's where that goes directly to the bottom. Don't worry about your top so much, because your top can be squared off later. You just want to make sure that your bottom, which is never going to be squared off, is nice and even. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to put your return on like that. Then you're going to flip this over face to face, and you're going to pin your bell to your first scallop. And so on and so forth. When you're done with this process, you're going to take it over to your sewing machine, starting from the bottom. Every one of these you're going to start from the bottom, and you're going to sew from the bottom up. And do not be too concerned that this bell comes over and doesn't meet the top of this. It never will. So don't get too concerned about this. When we form our bells, we're going to trim it off then. So go ahead, this is the time now. I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew it down, and I will be right back.